This will be my next response to the CES letter. I am still in section 1, titled The Book of Mormon. This will be issue number 10. Before I get into it, however, I must reiterate this is only my opinions, my thoughts. I do not speak for the church, nor do I speak for its leaders. I am simply giving my reaction and my response to the issues that are listed or described in the CES letter. Having said that, let us now read issue number 10. Another fascinating book published in 1809, the First Book of Napoleon. The first chapter, quote, "And behold, it came to pass in these latter days that an evil spirit arose on the face of the earth and greatly troubled the sons of men. And this spirit seized upon and spread amongst the people who dwell in the land of Gaul. Now in this people the fear of the Lord had not been for many generations, and they had become a corrupt and perverse people. And their chief priests and the nobles of the land and the learned men thereof had become wicked in the imagines of their hearts and in the practices of their lives. And the evil spirit went abroad amongst the people, and they raged like unto the heathen, and they rose up against their lawful king, and slew him, and his queen also, and the prince their son, yea, verily, with a cruel and bloody death. And they moreover smote with mighty wrath the king's guard, and banished the priests and nobles of the land, and seized upon and took them unto themselves their inheritances, their gold and silver, corn and oil, and whatsoever belonged unto them. Now it came to pass that the nation of the Gauls continued to be sorely troubled and vexed, and the evil spirit whispered unto the people, even unto the meanest and vilest thereof." End quote. And it continues on. It's like reading from the Book of Mormon. When I first read this, along with other passages from the First Book of Napoleon, I was floored. Here we have two early 19th century contemporary books written at least a decade before the Book of Mormon that not only read and sound like the Book of Mormon, but also contain so many of the Book of Mormon's parallels and themes as well. The following is a side-by-side comparison of selected phrases the Book of Mormon is known for from the beginning portion of the Book of Mormon, with the same order in the beginning portion of the First Book of Napoleon. Note, these are not direct paragraphs. And here is the list from the First Book of Napoleon. "Condemn not the writing, and account the First Book of Napoleon upon the face of the earth. It came to pass, the land, their inheritances, their gold and silver, and the commandments of the Lord, the foolish imaginations of their hearts, small in stature Jerusalem, because of the perverse wickedness of the people." And then we have the parallel list from the Book of Mormon. "Condemn not the writing, and account the First Book of Nephi upon the face of the earth. It came to pass, the land, his inheritance, and his gold, and his silver, and the commandments of the Lord, the foolish imaginations of his heart, large in stature, Jerusalem, because of the wickedness of the people." And that is where issue number 10 ends. And so, let us get into it. He says, here we have two early 19th century contemporary books, obviously also talking about the book The Late War, which I did in my previous video, which I will put a link to right here, as well as in the description. But in neither case do they really give us any indication or any proof, any evidence that Joseph Smith ever actually read these books. Now, with The Late War, they had some ground to stand on with their assumption in that it was published in the area. It was read by those in the general vicinity of Joseph Smith, even though there's no direct evidence linking it to Joseph Smith. There is some assumption that it is at least possible. It's plausible given the geographical proximity of the book's publication and where Joseph Smith was living. We'll give them that. But on this one, they don't even have that. The First Book of Napoleon was written by a Scot and published in London. Wasn't even in the United States. And they have no direct evidence to show that Joseph Smith ever read this book. There's no historical link between this book and Joseph Smith. All they have is, they sound similar, therefore it's obvious that he did. And I'm sorry, that's not a logical, it's not an intelligent argument to make. So there's that. Now this is just geographically, it's so far removed from Joseph Smith that without direct historical evidence that Joseph Smith had and read a copy of this book, there's no reason to assume that he did. Read and sound like the Book of Mormon. In as far as they use the Jacobean English phraseology that is common to the Bible, yes, they sound similar. But that is the extent. That's as far as it goes. The writing style is actually very different. For one thing, this is written in a third-person narrative. The Book of Mormon, especially the portion of the Book of Mormon that this is being compared to as the beginning of the Book of Mormon, or the First Book of Nephi, is written in a first person. Two different styles there. That's just basics. There's actually very different style. If you analyze them, you'll see. The Book of Mormon has a different writing style almost for every book in it. There are, I think, 16 books in the Book of Mormon, and each one, almost, has a different writing style. So, it starts off in the first person, it switches to a third-person narrator perspective, with the narrator interjecting his own personal ideas into it, and then switches back to a first-person narrative. This is all third-person narrative. So it definitely different in its style. Contains many of the Book of Mormon parallels and themes. The parallels are so broad as to be meaningless. So they both use the phrase "it came to pass." That's not an uncommon phrase. It's not like these are the only books ever written to use that phrase. So the parallels are so broad as to be meaningless. Then they talk about themes. Themes, by their very nature, are broad. So maybe a theme in the Book of Mormon is free will, personal accountability. That's also a theme in the Lord of the Rings. That's a theme in almost every book written about the Revolution. Themes are just general ideas, concepts that are found within, or kind of, as they say, permeate or pervade the entire body of a certain literary work. And they're very subjective. So it's like when you did a book report in school and your teacher, the last question they wanted you to answer was, what did the author want you to get from this? That's what they're talking about by themes. And it was subjective. And I always hated those questions because what I got out of the story was something very different than somebody else would have gotten out of the story. And I've talked to people who have read the Book of Mormon and they get things out of it that I've never even thought of before. So themes are not only broad, but subjective. So all of this stuff becomes meaningless because they're not really similar in writing. The parallels are too broad to have any meaning. And the idea of themes is so subjective in and of itself, subjective and broad, as to be applied to almost any literary work. So those are my preliminaries. Let us get into the side-by-side. Okay, so this is the side-by-side comparison. Well, they claim it's a side-by-side comparison, but to be side-by-side, you have to have one on one side, one on the other side. This isn't side-by-side. This is giving one list, then another list. So I actually changed it to a side-by-side comparison, so we can actually do a side-by-side comparison. Now, one of the claims they make here, this is from the beginning portion of the Book of Mormon, with the same order in the beginning of the First Book of Napoleon. Okay, so I looked it up, and this is where they start. The first time each of these phrases appears in the First Book of Napoleon and in the Book of Mormon. Now, in the First Book of Napoleon, I give a page number, and in the Book of Mormon, I give the chapter and verse in First Nephi, where each phrase appears. Except, of course, the first phrase, which doesn't appear in the main text of the Book of Mormon, but is part of the title page. So, now, you will note, they're all within the first 3 or 4 chapters. But in the First Book of Napoleon, they range from page 2 to page 29. That book only has 146 pages, about 150. So you're going through almost 20% of the book before you get all of these phrases. That's not in the beginning of the book. That's past the beginning. So there's that. Then they claim that they are in the same order. But you'll note, if you look at the page numbers, they're not in the same order. So let's put them in the right order. So here we go. Now they're in the right order. Starting on page 7. Again, not exactly the beginning of the book, but the third one in the list is actually the first one to appear in the first Book of Napoleon. But the first one, condemn not the writing, that appears in the introduction, page 9. An account, they list it as the second one, but it's actually the third one. The sixth one's the fourth one. The last one on the list is actually the fifth one. That it appears fifth. And if we compare this to the Book of Mormon, yes, the first one, condemn not, that's the first one to appear in the Book of Mormon, and the last one is the last one to appear in the Book of Mormon. But everything else is out of order. The 11th one actually appears is the fourth one to appear. The second one is the sixth one. Everything's out of order. And then they say they're the same phrases. Or at least similar phrases. But they misquote it. They actually, in the beginning, when they quote the first six verses, they have this list. And took unto themselves their inheritances, their gold and silver, corn and oil, and whatsoever belonged unto them. Yet, down in their side-by-side comparison, they give that same reference, but they say their inheritances, their gold and silver, and. Now in the Book of Mormon it is listed that way. Their gold and silver and precious things. And. But in the First Book of Napoleon, it's not listed that way. Very different style of listing, but they reordered it, they reworded it, or misquoted it in order to make it appear to have the same style of listing as in the Book of Mormon. Now, this particular style of listing actually does appear in the Book of Mormon later on, when Nephi is talking about those who are accepted of God. He says, the black and white, bond and free, male and female. We have a dual listing, a opposites of description, male, female, opposites, black, white, opposites, rich, poor, opposites. But in the First Book of Napoleon, they use this kind of dual listing where it's gold and silver, corn and oil. These aren't opposites, these are pairs. So again, even though this dual listing is in the Book of Mormon, its purpose is very different. So, not only do these not appear in the same order in the Book of Mormon as they do in the Book of Napoleon, they're in completely different orders. They're listed in the wrong order in the CES letter. They're misquoted in this, well, at least one of them is misquoted in the CES letter. All of these things were done to try and make the two books look like they're similar. And they are vaguely similar in a very broad way. But it is so broad as to be meaningless, and so they had to try and twist it to make it look more similar than it really is. And on a final note, most of these phrases that they say, that they list, are also found in the Bible. Most of them. There's 12 phrases total. Of these 12 phrases, 7 of them are in the Bible. Almost word for word. It came to pass upon the face of the earth. It came to pass is in the Bible 452 times. Upon the face of the earth is 12 times. An account is in the Bible twice. The commandments of the Lord, that's in the Bible 24 times. The name of the city, Jerusalem. So to conclude my video here on the issue regarding the First Book of Napoleon, just to reiterate, there is no evidence that Joseph Smith ever read this book, ever even knew it existed. So any attempt to connect him to this book has no foundation to it. That's the first thing. Second of all, in presenting this book, they have to alter the order and even the wording of the quotes and phrases that they are trying to draw parallels to. But most importantly, when you examine the details, the similarity between the two books is so broad, so general, as to be meaningless. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you are enjoying what I'm doing, like, subscribe, ring the notification bells. I am thinking of trying to get into this more full time, and I could use a little bit of support. So, and please share this. I will be doing the next one, hopefully within the next week, and I'm hoping to start other series as well, which I will mix it up with, so I'm not doing just the CES letter, but I will continue to do this one as well as do other things as well. And if there's any questions or any videos, any articles, anything that anybody wants me to look at, I am perfectly willing to do so. So, again, like, subscribe, ring the notifications, and tune in for the next video.